All right, so I'm here with John Banks, Associate Professor at the School of Communication at the Queensland University of Technology. John, how are you going today?
Awesome. Loving this balmy Brisbane autumn day.
yeah, yeah, the 30 plus degree weather that's meant to be like deep summer weather is happening in mid to late March. Um,
Yeah, definitely doing.
so John has been running a study over the last 12 months about fostering inclusivity and diversity in tabletop communities, particularly around Magic the Gathering Commander format, which we know and love here at From the Vault and at Vault Games overall. And in doing so, he's talked to many people from the Commander community, including players, store owners, and members of the Commander Rules Committee as well. Hopefully, you get to chat to someone directly from WotC soon. We'll see if that plays out. And full disclosure, John has been interviewing parts of the Vault Games player community and even myself as one of the store owners for his study as well. John, great to have you here and have a chat about inclusivity and community building. Hopefully, people will get something out of this, not only from a store perspective as a store owner or a store worker or a manager, but also as a member of a community that's hoping to foster those kind of diverse relationships. Um, so let's start with your background then, John. Who are you and how did you start in the tabletop hobby?
Okay, so I'm John. As Dylan mentioned, I happen to be an academic, a researcher at Queensland University of Technology, but pre that, for much of my life, literally, I've been a gamer. So right back to in high school in the 1980s, showing my age there, I played D&D. I got into D&D. I played with friends at schools. I GM, DM'd games with my friends and my brother. I was active in local clubs. I was active in then board gaming, which was predominantly back then the old Avalon Hill war games and things like that. In the 1990s, when Magic came out, I became aware of it through people that I was playing D&D with. We heard about this weird and wonderful game coming out of the States, all these rumors. Um, Cards started turning up. We were trying to figure out how to play it, how it worked, and I remembered finding this little game store at Strathpine of all places, in which there was a group of people. This would have been in mid 90s. I can't remember exact year. And that's when I first played Magic. Sat down. They gave me a Goblins deck, a mono red Gobbo's Bernie deck, and I got into it and loved it. And I've been a bit of on and off, a bit of a Magic tragic since then. Loved the game. Played it on and off for various reasons, various things going on in life. But yeah, look, it's been a game that's been important to me. Gaming's been an important part of my life. Going on from there over the recent years, really the last decade, in fact, maybe in particular the last 5 or 6 years, getting very interested in how the board gaming hobby and culture has been changing, the diversification in design, right? With from tabletop gaming, miniatures, through to the resurgence of interest in role playing, the resurgence of interest in board gaming, the wonderful new designs coming out with games like Wingspan, and you could go on and on.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been fascinated by it both personally and as a researcher. It's also an important part of my family culture. I play with my family a lot, particularly with my children and my partner. So I would say, yeah, I'm a bit of a big gaming nerd.
That's great to hear. We love gamers here at Vault. Um, so the main reason we asked you to join us here at From the Vault is because of your study in inclusive community building in a store environment. In 30 words or less, roughly, like, that's just kind of like a limiter there.
Yeah.
But can you please give those listening and watching it, watching the podcast here, a rundown of what you're looking into in this study?
Okay, so one of the things I'm looking into, and here I'll put my researcher hat on initially, and I'll switch between
Yep.
modalities a little bit on my fan participant hat. But as a researcher, I have been researching the video games industry for well over a decade, and it's where my research has tended to focus. I've been looking at issues in the video games industry in Australia, looking at the rise of the indie games companies and scene and the significance of it. But throughout this, in the research field, people that research video games and video games industry, an issue that has come up again and again and again, and it's been quite prominent in the industry as well, is the challenges around diversity and inclusion, right? It's been a game that's it's been an industry that has had its issues around that. It's been an industry that I think it's fair to say has been very much dominated by white guys, right?
That's
And
absolute. And like, look at us, two white guys
And look at
talking
us.
about
I know.
tabletop.
Two white guys
Who would
talking
have
about
thought?
it, right? Yeah. And that has raised a whole pile of concerns, right? We do want a more diverse hobby and a wider community. We want inclusion. We want people to feel comfortable with sharing their interests and hobbies. And it goes to also workplaces, right? People that want to work in the industry, do they feel welcome and included? Do they feel safe? There's been all the controversies around Gamergate that you and some listeners may be aware of.
Unfortunately,
Um,
yes.
and and there've been some many, significant researchers who have paid close attention. I'm not saying that, I'm far from the first person to have been raising these issues, and there have been many wonderful researchers, people of color, women research, feminist researchers, people that identify as LGBTQI plus or are concerned with the interests of that community, raising these questions and looking at them for a while. Right. So it's been a significant issue in the research field as well. And indeed, more broadly over media studies, the whole Me Too movement, it's rightly put a spotlight on industry practices and these questions, right? So I became interested in that. But the reason I became interested is I was aware that in my own experience, my personal experience, is it has been a challenge. Going back to the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, playing, look, it would be rooms full of young white guys, right?
Mm.
And I know, and I'm not saying this in a way to be accusatory, but I even think about some of my own practices back in the day of there were ways that perhaps I could have been more inclusive, right? That there were ways in which I played or participated in those communities that, thinking back, probably weren't welcoming to people that were different than me or looked different than me or wanted to socialize, or the way that they were comfortable in social interactions were different than what I was experienced and comfortable with in those scenes. So I had to become, and I continue to have to be aware of those privileges and those differences, and how there are ways in which perhaps we can play and game and interact in ways that are more open, welcoming, inclusive. So my research has been really interested because and I'll get to that in a moment, Dylan. But I have a history, and I'll disclose that I do have a history with people at Vault, with yourself, that goes
Mm-hmm.
back a few years, and the other owners and some people that play there. I've known some of your staff for many years. Trent, for example.
Yeah. Another
And
from the Vault podcast member, Trent. Yep.
yeah, Trent. And what's interested me, what fascinated me, was I saw a difference occurring, a different set of values, commitments, a different kind of space, which I was experiencing as more inclusive and more diverse. And I was interested in that. I was interested in how people were experiencing that, what contributes to enabling that from the perspective of the store owners.
Yep.
The challenges of making that work as a business, to make that sustainable as a business, right? The values and commitments around that, the kind of staff challenges and the significance of staffing and the staff work and the skills and capabilities and commitments to achieve that and to foster that, but also what the community itself has done. Because my experience playing at Vault, and there are challenges and issues as well. I don't want to be everything at Vault is wonderful and
Yeah. No.
fantastic.
There's
There
speaking as the owner, and yeah, it's and the primary community builder for a large chunk of the business's life. Like, there are plenty of challenges.
Yeah, plenty of challenges. But what I've been interested in over the time of the research, the period of the research, is actually looking at that and looking how people do that, how they understand that, how it matters to them in different ways, how they communicate and negotiate around that. And so I could talk about more about that in a moment, but that's broadly why I've been interested in looking at it in the context of Vault, and why Commander, I guess, in the context of Vault. Well, Commander has at its heart as a format, a magic format, right? The social imperative.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's been conceived as a social game. So when I've interviewed, for example, people like Sheldon Menery to inform this research, and other members of the CAG and the advisory group, they all, without fail, prioritize and emphasize the social imperative at the heart of the game. They talk, this is nothing new. They've talked about this
Yeah.
publicly many times, right? But what I've been interested in is, what does that mean, right? Because social can mean different things to different people and the ways it's experienced. It can mean that if you get a room full of young, white, very experienced gamers, they can make all sorts of assumptions about what social means, right?
Yeah.
if you want to create affordances in which you broaden that experience of social, what about people who have disabilities and want to come in and play in the store space? How do you ensure that that social interaction works for them? What about women players? What about people that identify as non-binary? What about people that have ethnically and racially diverse, right? That this what social means and that experience of play can be very different. How do we negotiate that in a way that works for as many players as
Yeah.
possible? I guess
It
that's the question I've been interested in.
Yeah, it's definitely there's definitely like a parallel line between what is social to people and what is fun to people because they're
Mm,
the two different major elements. And we'll get into breaking down Commander format a bit more in shortly.
mm,
But you did mention Sheldon Mannery in there from the Commander Rules Committee, the founder of the
mm.
format. Who else have you been talking to with this study? Like we mentioned a little bit earlier, you
Look, I've chatted with Gavin Dugan. I've chatted with Olivia Gobert Hicks. I've chatted with Jim Lepage. I'm trying to remember all the people. Quite a few different people from the Commander Advisory Group as well. And look, it was great because I initially approached Sheldon and just literally through Discord
yeah.
and just said, "Hey, I'm doing this research," and he has been so open and so supportive of the project, of discussions with me. He's invited, put me in contact with other people to have discussions, and I think that shows the openness and interest of that group of fairly senior stakeholders in the game that have a lot of skin in the game. He is the format founder in some ways. He acknowledges the antecedents of that and the significance of other people as well that have fed into the development of the format, but still a significant person
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
world of
absolutely.
Commander, right?
He is
And
EDH king, really.
yeah, I think he's referred to in some places as the Commander Godfather, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Uh,
It's
but
the
Sheldon
Marlon
has
Brando of
been
the four-player table.
well, yeah, but he has been really open and interested in these questions, including how the format can do this better,
Hmm.
including the challenges around the format, how it's changed and evolved. And I think you see that in the change in makeup recently of people on the rules committee.
Yeah.
That you have someone like Olivia on there now, that you have a far more diverse representation on the wider commander advisory group. I
Well, that
think you're seeing it, so
well, that definitely brings me to my next question. Then, like, what kind of what are these? I'd assume that because you're looking at how different social can be for everyone and how different fun can be for everyone. I assume that even out of the Commander Rules Committee and the Commander Advisory Group, that they're also giving like quite different answers to your questions as well. So it presents like a diverse opinion even all the way to the top of Commander. Is that correct?
well, of course. It's interesting that they all emphasize the social imperative, right? And they do, and they seem to really want to hold on to that and maintain that at the heart of the game. And so when you're having discussions with them about things like game mechanics,
Mm-hmm.
um, the controversial question of what should or shouldn't be banned, or how extensive the ban list should be,
Yes, the
etc.,
constant
etc.
discussion, discussion that Trent and I have every week. What should or
Yep.
shouldn't be banned in Commando?
Yeah, and that comes up in store with the research I'm doing, and that's one of the frequent discussions I either overhear or get to participate in, or occurs in pods that I'm playing at. Someone will be dirty about a particular card that's dropped, and there'll be laughter, and there'll be that card should be banned, like dockside or something.
Yeah,
Right? A table will be on the wrong end of a dockside, you know, and there'll be a discussion about, oh, are they looking at that card? Should it be in the game? How fair is it? It's fascinating. But what comes up again and again is the awareness. From my experience, the people I've spoken to on both the advisory group and the Worlds Committee, they're aware of all this. They're in touch with many people in the broader Commander ecosystem, from players that play in stores, at conventions. Of course, they have close contacts
hmm
inside Wizards that they talk about, and they're aware of the cards that are being raised and discussed. Now, they're following it fairly closely, but they are reluctant to hit too many things with the band stick And one of the reasons is because the social imperative at the heart of the game and the awareness that the game is played very differently in different places.
Hmm.
People playing kitchen table at home with a casual group of friends, they may have their own understanding and approaches to that versus what works in a particular store environment, a particular store culture that may have a slightly more competitive or slightly more um, casual, social approach. So they, while the rules and the commander philosophy and the ban list is important, they view it as indicative. It's almost like a guide in which they are really encouraging local play groups and communities to address that themselves as part of their social experience. That comes to things like the Rule Zero conversation. Now, in saying that, the conversations I've had, they know that's not perfect.
Yeah.
They know that that's difficult to do. They know that that can break down at times. And we could probably get to that because it's been fascinating for me as a researcher watching the different ways that plays out in the store community, for
Yeah.
example. But there are also different views about things like what commander means in terms of power levels as well. Like you've got someone like Jim Lepage on the group now that comes from a bit of a more, I guess, competitive commander background. I mean, he doesn't view himself, at least in the discussions I've had with him, and I don't want to misrepresent him here, as a particular CEDH person. And
Yeah.
I don't think he sees himself as speaking on behalf of that community at all. But he is interested in the more high-powered play and the cool synergies you can do with decks, etc. But one of the things that he pointed out to me is that viewing that as separate from or opposed to social may be a problem because it has its own forms of social
Yeah.
interaction, its
And
own
and
conventions of social interaction,
and its own forms of fun. Like that's
its own
yeah,
understandings of
own
fun.
understandings of
Yep.
fun. It's yeah, it's such a complex beast. And like the last question on kind of like understanding the study and all that. What's your hopes of like
Mm.
where do you hope that this study leads to? Like what kind of outcomes do
Okay.
you think are like not necessarily say that the study's going to solve everything and all that kind of stuff, but kind of like an understanding. What kind of understandings are you hoping to bring out from that?
So there's a couple of levels. First of all, at the academic level, I hope that the research, and I will be publishing from it, and I'm in the process of drafting a book at the moment from the material, and academic presentations at conferences and workshops, etc., to contribute to the discussions and debates that are occurring around games and game culture generally. And there is a resurgence of interest at the moment around board gaming cultures and hobbies. For example, I have a colleague in the United States, Aaron Trammell. He has a great book that I'm aware of coming out in April called The Privilege of Play. And he looks at the history of the hobby and questions and issues around things like white privilege and the issues around that and what certain kinds of assumed male white identities in the game that perhaps have been a bit exclusionary and gatekeepy. And he's looked at, and it's a fascinating book looking at the history of it. I want to contribute to those discussions,
Mm-hmm.
but in a way in which says, okay, what are some of the things we can do about this to address this? And what are some of the things that are actually happening out there? And I'm looking at a very specific place, a specific store with a specific community and culture. So I do have to be careful about not overly generalizing from
Absolutely,
that,
yeah.
right? But I look at this specific store and I look at what's happened in the community, what's happened amongst the owners and the staff that work there. What have they done and what has happened in that community that at least I perceive is going some way towards fostering a somewhat more inclusive and welcoming and diverse community. So that's the big contribution I hope to make, and to continue that discussion, to have a discussion and to contribute to that discussion, perhaps even more broadly in the hobby. So through interfacing with things like the Commander Advisory Group and the RC, and maybe getting the research out there a bit more widely to have a discussion in the community about these questions, hopefully in an open, kind, considerate way. I mean, that has its risks because, as you're aware, in the broader Magic community and ecosystem, there's a quite diverse range of views around on this issue, right?
Yeah.
You see stuff unfortunately, on Reddit and other places, not just Reddit, but other places, where there be accusations or allegations. This is all some form of problematic wokeness, right? That's being imposed on the game or players. And I'm hoping that perhaps we can move beyond that, have a bit of a discussion about why more inclusive, more welcoming, more open approaches are good for the game, are good for the hobby. And we can talk about that, Dylan, because I know you have views on that. Your own
Oh,
store's
look, there's
vision of everyone's a gamer.
yeah, and there's absolutely a place as well to say in there that, it's not just good for games, and it's not just good for communities, it's also just good for business. Like that
Mm,
seems to be something that a lot of people forget. That if you appeal to more people will give you their money, and that just
mm,
lets you make a bigger business. And that's just
mm.
there's so much to go on about that. Um, so
And the
other
other thing,
yeah,
one other point I'd make is one of the things I hope that the book and the research will achieve is at the moment there is two white guys talking about this,
absolutely,
right?
yeah, and that's something
And
that we need to
and
acknowledge that.
yeah, and we do need to acknowledge that. So
Yeah.
one of the things I'm hoping to do in the book is create a space, and the writing off it, I'm being very sensitive to this, is it's creating a space and a platform for those diverse voices to be heard with their experiences and views on this. And that's where the opportunity involved has been wonderful. And I would like to do a shout out to the community here and a huge thank you,
Hmm.
because this research is not possible without the generosity and openness of the people that have played with me, shared their experiences with me, talked to me, um, been prepared to do some more formal interviews with me, and their openness and preparedness to share, I think, quite generously about their experiences in these areas, I think really enriches the research. And I really want to make sure that those voices and those experiences are heard, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're watching this as well, on YouTube, or listening to this through another app, um, jump into the comments on the YouTube channel and share some of your experiences in the community. Are you an individual that isn't generally represented in a Magic community? Let us know like what experiences you've had, whether they're good or bad, and what kind of actions stores and community members can take to help foster that better space for you and the people around you.
Mm.
Um, so let's get into the meat of it. Obviously, we've it keeps coming up. We're talking about Commander format. For those that don't know, I'd assume many of the listeners on here know what the Commander format is for Magic. But for those that don't know, the Commander format is a format that was created by Sheldon Mannery and a couple of friends who are also judges at a GP back in was it like the late '90s, mid to late '90s? And the
They, they
rule,
actually first they actually first encountered it. So the story goes, and Sheldon he acknowledges this, is that he was in the Air Force. He was in Alaska, and he came across a group of people, a local play group, playing this game that was multiplayer,
yeah,
and it had different rules, and he was fascinated by it. He did tweak and adjust it, and he was a judge on the pro,
yeah,
I think on the pro tour at the time, and he took that and played it in the down times at tournaments.
yeah.
And
Times of
the thing
tournaments.
that he and the things that he shared that they really valued was just the craziness of singleton format,
Well, yeah.
100 card decks,
So
just the crazy decks you could build, and the possible kinds of interactions you could have with other players around that, when you weren't necessarily playing to optimize play lines, or as he put it, there's a winner, but you weren't necessarily playing to win.
yeah, and to in terms of that singleton format, the 100 cards, the basically the way the decks work is you pick a commander that is a legendary creature. Back in the old days, it was only one of the elder dragons from I think like Legend
Mm.
set or something like that. But your deck picks a legendary creature as your commander.
Mm.
Your deck can only include colorless cards or cards that have a color identity that match your commander. So that is they specifically generate mana of your commander's colors. Or their cards that have the colored pips of your commander's colors on them. Um, and you can only include one copy of each card unless it was a basic land in a total of 100 card deck. And your commander sits in this special zone called the command zone. That's kind of like an extra card in your hand that everyone can see. You can cast it from your command zone anytime you would normally be able to cast that creature. But every time you cast it out of a command zone, a tax is applied of an extra 2 generic mana every time you cast it out from then on. And then if that commander would go to a hidden zone, so if it would change zones at all, so if it would go from, if it would change it from an active zone, sorry, I believe the active zones of stack and battlefield don't change. But if it changes from the battlefield to your hand or to the graveyard, or it goes to your graveyard or to exile or whatever, you can instead put it back in the command zone and you have the chance to cast it again. But again, you're paying the tax. That's essentially the format of Commander. It's a 4-player multiplayer. From a game design perspective, myself, I love multiplayer games because they allow you to be a lot looser when it comes to balancing games. A 1v1 format requires that every card needs to be assessed in relation to other cards, and you have like a balancing format. You have to have balance that kind of format. Whereas in a 4-player game, in a 4-player competitive game where everyone's kind of playing their own game against each other in a free for all, the players have a way of balancing the game themselves, where if one player gets ahead, the 3 other players are likely to pull them back down, and those kind of elements. Obviously, there's cards printed that completely destroy that capability, and that's why the ban list exists. But yeah, that's the quick and dirty of the Commander format. So we mentioned that social is different for everyone. We've mentioned that fun is different for everyone. Is that what makes this format so important of a candidate for your study? Is that it's not only about the diversity of players,
definitely.
it's about the diversity of play.
Definitely. So one of the things that interested me about Commander and why I focused on Commander, and for a while and moving ahead with my research, I am interested in continuing across different games. I am interested in looking at what social looks like in the context of miniatures, for example,
Yeah.
or the differences across these communities and sub-communities in the hobby. But Commander was my first point because at the heart of it is social, but it's the way the social experience interacts with the specificities and mechanics of Commander as a game, right? Because I can remember, the Professor, Tolarian Community, great video a while ago I watched where I can't remember the exact words he used, but he was referring to Commander as kind of being a broken format.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we kind of pretend it works. All right. We got to sit there. We got to pretend.
It's the entire kind of economic system of the world, right? It only works if we all agree that it works.
If we all agree it works, right? Because it's so hard to balance. It's so hard to, it's not like chess or a game like this. It's just sitting down and you kind of have a some ways stated and understood agreement that, hey, this doesn't quite work as a competitive game in which it's balanced and everyone has an equal chance of coming out at the end as the winner, right? But is that actually why we're playing? What is the experience that we're playing? And how do we negotiate and navigate that so all 4 players sitting around a table can reach some sort of agreement and understanding and shared experience that they're having fun together, and there's an understanding of what that involves, how that's realized and achieved. And sometimes what fascinates me is that when that is achieved well, it can be awesome. The feeling of a pod that has gone well and you've had a great night and a great experience with that group of people. I can recall many games at Vault where I've experienced this or seen this. People are high-fiving each other. It gets noisy. There's laughter.
Yeah.
There's oohs and ahs about plays. It's almost like a drama, right? You can you have it's a story. And in that way, in some ways, shares elements of D&D and role playing, right? So that's an awesome experience. And sometimes you can have games where it's a bit doo-doo. You look at each other. Someone's played a deck that others around the table think is not fair or doesn't meet the expectations of everyone else, or does a play that other people don't like or don't expect or haven't expected, and everyone's looking at each other, and there are these awkward moments at the end of the game. Everyone's going, well, that was it, I guess. And there can be not such a great experience for a range of reasons. And I've been really interested in how players negotiate and communicate as well around those different understandings and experiences of fun. And I've also been really interested in the terms that players use. So when I interview players, or I hear them talking or talk with them while I'm playing, when I ask them why they play Commander, what is it about the game? Invariably that comes up is because it's social, right? This is why I play it again and again. But when I start asking them what that means for them, what is that? It is interesting that it's different for different people. For some people, it can be that I come to the store or I get together with a group of people that I know really well. We've been playing together for a year, 2 years, 3 years longer. We know each other's decks. We know each other's play styles. So we can have a laugh about when X friend pulls off their weird combo because we know how weird it is, how unlikely it is to come off, but it came off in that particular game. All power to them. They went off and we celebrate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or a player is playing their Voltron deck and they've got a few pieces, cards they've been chasing for a while, and one of us has pulled a particular art version of a piece of equipment, a sword they've really wanted. We've got it in their deck and they're playing it, and we're really excited together because they are having this fun experience playing with these cards that they've wanted for a while. They love the art and they know the stories behind the pieces, and there's lots of discussion around that, right? So these natures of social interaction are different. Or you can go from that to a pickup group, casual pickup group. You come into the store, you've never met these people before in your life. You paired up at a table. I've had this happen to me at Vault. And you sit down and maybe one of the players is new. It's like a kid, 14, 15-year-old, just come in and picked up a pre-constructed deck, brought it first few times of playing, and to see their joy in the game and their and the rest of the table, the other three people, maybe a bit more experienced, noticing that and playing to that,
Yeah.
and trying to create a game experience and a table experience that person gets to enjoy the game. So you may actually be playing down a little bit. You may actually be not playing cards that would take that person out of the game, right? And that's understanding that's shared. And at the end of the game, everyone kind of agrees at the table, even though there's a prize pack or whatever, we're going to flick that to that kid so that they have a great experience. There's the fun factor, that social factor gets realized in all sorts of different ways that I really have enjoyed experiencing, but also trying to understand the nuance of.
Yeah, it's like this storytelling within playing the game itself, not just necessarily winning, which again comes back to your idea of a win isn't a win. A win of the game isn't a win for the experience necessarily for everyone. Some people have a win in the experience by just watching someone pull Sower of Discord off the top and then take out two players instantly. Those kind of fun, interesting things.
And players will talk about their sit down before the game, after the game, sometimes during the game, and tell the stories about their cards that they've got, how they got that card, who may have given it to them, the circumstances in which they pulled it, and how excited they were. Maybe it was a pre-release event. There are people in the store that have various ranges of years of experience in the hobby. You've got someone that's been playing the game for decades in the store and pulls out some old card and can tell you the story about that card, right? And so there's that aspect of the game as well, the making of the decks, the sharing of the decks, the trading that goes on around that. There's so many layers to the social, what we call social, in the game. There are people. The one thing I would like to comment about the store context, Dylan, is in that store and the diversity that I see there. There's a certain level of kindness in the store where people that are getting together regularly, and that there is the game, but it's an opportunity to talk about what your experience has been, things that have been going on for you in your life during the week. And people know people in the community that may be struggling with some issues, right? Or some challenges, or something's been going on at work or whatever. And people get to know each other. And there is this really caring environment and vibe there about people have known each other for a while. And some people in the store, I won't say who, because there are confidentiality issues around the research, etc. But this is a comment that's come up again and again. The game is really important to me for my mental well-being and mental health.
Yeah.
Right. These Tuesday nights I come along and I play matter to me in my life so much. And it is an important opportunity for social interaction for me in ways, for a range of reasons, that I'm either not comfortable with or have challenges with gaining from other areas of my life. So for some of the people that come along on these Tuesday nights, it's a game, but it's also much more than that. So I think an awareness around that of how much the game and these environments and these stores and the communities around them mean to some people that are there. They're not just customers. Sure, they're there buying products and investing and supporting the business, but that place is a place that many of them have shared with me that they feel safe and comfortable socializing, right? And that for a range of reasons, other areas in their life, they don't feel so comfortable. So I think that's a dimension of the social that's overlaid there with the game. And it interests me how that occurs, how some of these people talk about how, for some reason, a game like Commander and other games as well,
Hmm.
provides them an opportunity or almost a mechanism around which can structure that social interaction in ways that they feel okay with and safe with. They may have social anxiety challenges in their life. A range of things may be going on. So I think that's a really interesting and an important dimension of the game that perhaps we don't necessarily often think about and pay enough attention to.
Yeah, yeah, and it's it's the kind of thing that I hear rumblings of as a store owner all the time. That, oh, this is such a great space that if it didn't exist, I'd have all these kind of problems or whatever. And it's kind of heartwarming to hear that, like, that's actually coming through in the research as well.
Mm,
Because a lot of times I think it's there from like third party whispers, blah 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 blah. But to actually know that people have said this stuff in confidence is actually really important to me as a store owner,
mm,
because it feels like what we're doing here is good, and it's the right thing to do by the community. Um,
mm.
and I hope other store owners watching this have that thought in mind when they go about starting, or even potential store owners in the future, have that in mind when they go about creating these communities, or looking at their
Mm.
current communities and going, how can this be better? Um,
On that point, just a couple of things that have come through in the research I think might be important from what I picked up from Volt. The first of all, it's an explicit commitment to that. It's not auxiliary or additional to the business. It's at the heart of it. I mean, I think that's there in your vision that you've had for a long time, that you've shared with me a few times, that thing about everybody's a gamer,
yes,
right?
yeah.
But working through what does that actually mean and how do you do that? And that everybody is not just assumed to be a certain kind of dude, right? That there is an awareness and the challenges of doing that as well, right? And some of the things that some of the people have shared with me in the store about they come to Vault, why they've stuck with Vault, why they've gained with Vault, and they have played at other stores, is, and I'm not going to mention specific other stores or anything like
No,
that. It
no,
wouldn't be
and
appropriate
please
to.
don't. Yeah.
But what no, but what they talk about is their general experience of, I would call, gatekeepy behavior, and sometimes I don't even think it's intentional. Right.
Mm,
I don't even think it's them wanting to be intentionally exclusionary. It's when a young woman walks into the store and the assumption is, where's the dude she's with?
mm,
Or this is how she feels that the staff are approaching her, or that she doesn't know, or they don't know the rules of the game and aren't an experienced player and have to have that all explained to them when they sit down, right? The mansplaining phenomena,
mm,
right? Or the way the spaces are set up and that there aren't adequate toilets, to cater to different people that are set up there. There's a range of different aspects of stores and their environment, or you walk in and all the staff are guys, right? And there's no one on the floor that is a woman or presenting gender differently than what you would assume is a cis man, a guy, right? So these are things that players have mentioned to me again and again about Vault, what they mean by the comfort level there, or the welcomingness, that when they walk in there, they're invariably often welcomed by someone in the store. Sure, there are men and that present as men there, but there are also people that present, or that as non-binary. There are people there that present and work there who are women, except all sorts of ranges of identity category or identity experience, and that's really important to people. But also the awareness of your staff that when problems arise, and they do, and they have at Vault, and people have shared some of that with me, that people feel comfortable and trusting that Vault staff are, first of all, prepared to deal with that in a sensitive way,
mhm,
that they have the backing of management to deal with that staff feel that, and that they have the experience and ability to do those things when something has gone wrong, when someone has been made to feel uncomfortable in the store for whatever reason, with unwelcome attention or unwelcome, unkind comments that of various kinds that can occur. Again and again and again, it's been shared with me that Vault staff, without hesitation, deal with that,
mm,
right? So that, and that there's a commitment to that. So I think those aspects I think are really important. And some staff have shared with me that when they first came along and played at Vault, there weren't a lot of people that they identified as women there.
Yeah.
There may have been one or two in the group that they walked in and they said, "Oh well, it's a lot of guys still, right?" But they felt welcomed and included. They didn't feel those gatekeepy behaviors. They felt that it was okay to come in and play. The assumption wasn't that, what are you doing here? Have you walked into the shop by accident? Or do you know what Magic is? The assumption was, oh, hi, how can we help you? What are you into? And
Yeah.
there'd be a discussion of, do you know what I mean? There was, so
Yeah.
a
Look,
lot of people have shared that with me.
there's definitely something to be said about being a gatekeeper of gatekeepers. That's certainly something that we kind of do here at Vault, and that I feel that a lot of communities need to look at, like, where do you draw the line on that kind of behavior. Um,
And that's interesting, right? Because we discussed this, you and I have discussed this through the
yeah,
research sometimes, is the need to exclude in order to include,
yeah, yeah. It's that paradox of
you know?
tolerance, right? Like, are you so tolerant that you tolerate the intolerant? Like, that's the kind of level
Mm,
of, there's a whole discussion about, oh, you shouldn't. It's the whole free speech thing.
yeah.
That, but
But you know
like,
what?
you
When
shouldn't
when
you
I've
shouldn't
when I've
tolerate.
talked
Yeah.
when I've talked to people in your store, and people like Trent, I'm comfortable mentioning Trent by name because he has given me permission to, with the
Yep.
research,
Yep.
etc. He talks about, when we talk about doing this well, and there are many other people in the store I've discussed this as with. It's pretty simple. Talks about it as just being considerate.
Yeah, and that's the thing
Ha,
that Trent and I have discussions about all the time too, is about that
being,
consideration, like being a
yeah.
considerate player, not just a considerate person. Like, a
Mm,
considerate person's actually like just a general social thing. If you sign the social contract
mm,
of life in a society, then you should be considerate of others. But when it comes to the commander format and gameplay, that consideration is a key
mm,
element of that social agreement that we talked about. It's not only wanting to say, hey, this is my social understanding of the game, and then this is my idea of fun in the game. It's also being considerate of others in having that idea of
mm.
social and that idea of fun, which then breaks down to the whole, like, oh, if my idea of fun is competitive gameplay with optimized loops where I'm playing solitaire for 2 or 3 turns, that can still be fun. And the trick is to just is trying to find a group that is seeing that as fun as well and has that social dynamic as well, which is one of the reasons why we have those competitive and those tune tables for our commander events. Is the
Mm.
idea is not only to say, hey, your deck is really strong and you should be playing on these tables because the people at other tables won't really know how to deal with you, but there's also that element of the people at these tables have a social idea of, this is the social idea of this table, and we have a consideration of this is how we're going to play.
And it's complicated, right? And
Yeah,
it can be difficult and challenging because there are different knowledge levels of the game.
absolutely.
For a start, you can have someone sit down and they're a newish player, but they may have some dollars, right?
Yeah,
They
yeah.
may have some
Yep.
income available. So they've brought a pre-con, they've been to some pre-release events, they've been beaten up a few times, played some games, they've jumped online, net deck, and just gone on it, and they're dropping in these cards, right?
Yep. They have a
Madly
mono they
expensive
have a
cards.
mono red Ragavan deck that's
Yeah,
just Dockside
yeah. And
Extortionist.
good. So you get that level, and it's literally inadvertent, and it sometimes can be through excitement of the game, for the game, and they just think this is what you do, right? You get the cards, they're legal. I pulled them, I brought them, I can chuck them in a deck, and I can sit down and play to the best of my ability. And so there's that level of, and there's a
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
there's a kind of a mentoring and and I think there are people involved that are good at this, including some people in the store that will take these people aside gently,
Yeah, and be
just
like, hey,
be quiet,
maybe you
chat,
should be
hey,
playing on a higher table with a better kind of like social
or
understanding of what's going on.
you're still learning. Maybe you might want to take some of those cards out for now, and you know what I
Yeah,
mean. So there's
yeah.
there's that level, which is fine. and then there's the level, but there is another level, and this is where it gets a little bit controversial, and this is what you're aware of when my research hit a particular period at Volt
Yep.
where there was some controversy in the community. So this is again where I want to be careful about not presenting Volt as this place where you sit down and play and everything's wonderful all the
Yeah,
time,
no, it's not.
and
It's not
and
perfect.
everybody's
It's
happy.
it's
It's not
never
perfect.
perfect.
There are problems. And I saw a period of time where there were these problems around how the kinds of decks and play styles some players were bringing to what you called your regular table, right?
Yeah.
And that's where probably what more than 2/3 of the players play each Tuesday night.
Yeah, I'd say about
Easy,
that.
yeah, yeah. And Tuesday night at Vault, you get what 50 plus players.
Yeah, 50. We
It's
we
full.
sell out at 52. Yeah.
Yeah, 52. It's full. It's a great environment. Like the first time I went there, it almost felt like a semi-party environment for a
Yeah.
while. But it's a great vibe. But the regular table, it's like, well, what is regular?
Yeah.
Everybody seems to be fairly comfortable with knowing what casual is. You got pre-cons and there's sorts of cards you don't play, and the priority is on fun and social, and I that's generally how it works. And if someone just doesn't get it, right, and they have to be shifted.
Yeah.
The more competitive, the tuned in, what you call tuned, is players are there. They're playing to win.
Yep.
You know, they've got some blinged up decks with some moderately to quite expensive decks that can win quickly if they get going, right? They can go off and be done turn 6, but again, or even sooner. But again, there have been games I think I've seen on Tune that have gone for hours,
Oh, we've
right?
had we've had
So
games on Tuned that the store's meant to shut at 10, and they've been going since they've been going until 11:30. And now these were the days
yeah,
where I was working in the store, so I wasn't paying anyone to close the
yeah,
store. Then I was just there, and I was like, yeah, sure, I'll see this out. This is fun. Um,
yeah,
like that was
yeah.
the
But the
days of the like 8 counterspell commander stack. Like it was insane. Um,
and the view of the players and I've interviewed some of those players, and
yeah,
they're very social, many of
yeah.
them, right?
And they come out of that going, oh
Differently.
my god, that was the most amazing game I've ever had.
Yep. Yep. And they're into it. And when I talk to them about Commander, they do talk about their social as having an understanding. And when you sit down, you're playing to win,
Yep.
and everybody understands that. And you're bringing your best deck, and you might have discussions about that. And there are discussions, and I've overheard or participated in discussions where people are talking about how to power your deck up.
Yeah.
These are things you might want to think about. The packages, groups of cards you might want to include that you're not. Maybe your mana base is not quite working, talking about how to get that deck to a higher, more efficient level. And they enjoy playing in the game in a very efficient way, which is looking for those lines of play that are optimal. And there's a lot of laughter about that. They're not mega serious.
Yeah.
There could be a bit of salt as well. You can see a bit of salt at times when
Yeah. Yeah.
someone's deck is
There's
just
been those
rolls,
times.
but it's laughter, but that saltiness is part of it too, and there's kind of an understanding and a laughter about the trash talk, etc., that occurs. Although, again, I do have some questions about that as to how that plays into or leans into. This is a bigger conversation. Certain understandings of masculine play or
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
competitive mindsets that and how welcoming or open that is to other people that may approach that indifferently. That's a different discussion.
Look, I
But
definitely, I
at
definitely think there's like there's that social element when you talk about that social,
mm,
that social like designation and that social consideration. Even when it comes to like the trash talk, there are tables that I will never trash talk at because these are all new
mm,
players or they're players that I know, aren't into that as part of that social interaction. But then when you get Trent
mm.
and I at a table, like we will just constantly like go at it, and
Yep.
I think we even pull it back for hardcast. To be honest.
Yeah.
But we've had some really fun games. And then even on Tuesday night recently, playing a game with some people at the store that are people that I play with on and off every now and then, because every now and then I still just appear at the nights or are working in the store and finish up, and I'm like, oh, I might play a game with someone. And as always, really good fun and just awesome banter the whole time. Which is a
And
whole
and
nother thing. Because
and
that
again,
that game was insane.
it's that consideration thing, right?
Yeah,
You,
yeah,
you've got consideration and awareness for the people that you're sitting down with and playing, and that some of the types of interactions you might do are appropriate and okay with some players and not with others.
yeah,
I think
absolutely.
about the way I play with my daughter Charlotte. I get salty, and there's trash talk, fierce trash talk, because she is an incredibly
I know.
competitive player,
I
and
always
she's up for it.
I always love seeing when you and Charlotte both have the same name against each other for like Friday Night Magic or pre-release. Like they're always like fun games to hear about afterwards. Um,
They're fun
it's
games,
always
yeah,
fun seeing Charlotte come up to me afterwards and be like, "Yeah, I just smoked Dad." I'm like, "Yeah, you did."
and yep.
Um,
And Charlotte she often brings that mindset to her play, and she enjoys it.
yeah,
But there are players that don't,
yeah,
and don't want to interact around Magic or Commander with that level of competitive edge and what goes with it. And so, but where I'm getting to in all that is that what happened on casual is it gets so regular, where most of your players play,
yeah,
is it gets blurry,
yeah,
right? Some players were viewed as bringing decks and not just the decks and the nature of the cards, that was playing into it. The other arguments about power level. Is it, where does a deck sit? Is it a 9? Is it a 5? Is it a 6? Is it too powerful to play with a particular group of players? How do you even assess that, right?
yeah. Well, which is
And
one
there
of
was
the
a
harder
view.
things that we do too, because we one of the things
It's
for
really
us
hard,
is we have a
but there was
power
a
level
view.
discussion, but yeah,
Yeah, but there was a view that players were bringing decks were more competitive than what they should be, and they were playing them in a competitive style for those tables that was upsetting or not viewed as appropriate by others that played it regular. They viewed it as erring on the other side of that social, that more competitive side that wasn't appropriate for those. And there was a lot of discussion about it. But it got quite
yeah,
interesting in that I saw some dynamics at the end of games where people were literally, because they knew this was going on in the store a little bit, apologizing for winning. So that
yeah.
there was this reticence about, oh, I didn't mean to
Oh, I
win
didn't
my
mean to do that. I'm so
you know,
sorry. I didn't expect
I'm
this to
so
go
sorry.
off.
But I think what I saw in the store with the way it was handled, and the discussions, that it was a little bit self-correcting. I think some of
Yeah,
these people picked up on from discussions that were occurring in the store. They're approached by other players, and by the way, many of these discussions I saw were considerate
yeah,
discussions. They
yeah,
weren't aggressive. They were open discussions about, hey, what's going on with your deck? That's interesting. What do you think? This is the other people's experience. And I saw some of those players and had discussions with some of those players who actually decided to tone their decks down
yeah,
and to think about that. And in a quite reflective, considerate way. But it was interesting that some other players struggled with that they viewed their decks as fine. They were legal. They didn't view them as ultra competitive EDH decks, but perhaps they were struggling to see the other players, the other three players' perspective at the table, that, hey, you're winning a big percentage of your games, perhaps, and that doesn't gel right for a group of pods in the store that are focusing more at that social, somewhat social style of play, not necessarily non-competitive, but lighter competitive, I guess you'd say.
yeah. Absolutely, and that always becomes like a problem when we try to have those deck discussions and we try to limit those
Mm,
decks. Like as the store, and also we have like a commander committee at the store itself. We have like a committee of a couple of players from different tables that we have discussions about store events and store pricing and store rules,
mm,
commander rules, all that kind of stuff. Because we do have like that table structure has been built around those kind of feedback discussions. And it's every year we have this discussion over how do we define the tables. So at the moment, the best way that we can define it is about the card, the deck build, right? We talk about that power level discussion. We say at these kind of power levels, you're looking at this deck, or these kind of expectations of your deck. So, if you're playing impactful plays on turn 4 or 5, then we're probably going to be looking at regular plus or tuned. If you're like a regular or tuned, if you're doing impactful plays on turn 7 or 8, well, you're definitely looking at
mm,
casual. What kind of redundancy do you have in the deck? All that kind of stuff. But there's also this discussion to be had about a deck build in the hands of players, right? For instance, if you have a brand new player who rocks up with a Urza Lord High Artificer, or High Lord Artificer, whatever it is, deck that they've net decked, but they've only been playing for like 3 days, Um, I don't expect that to win on the tune table at all. But the way that deck's built and our experiences with that deck is goes, you have to play on tuned. I'm very sorry,
Mm,
but them as a player are not going to have a good time there because the deck that they've built isn't going to work because they don't, and that's not their fault. They just don't have an understanding of how that deck plays and the intricacies of that deck. Whereas someone like me who plays Sahili Gifted Artisan, that is one of my pet decks that I've built up over time, over several years, and I have a very strong understanding of how that deck works. I understand what my probabilities are of getting things out. I understand what I need to look for when I'm tutoring for cards. Like, I understand this deck, and I have won. The deck itself, the way it's built, it's not tuned at all. Like, it's easily a regular plus card, like a high regular table deck. Like, it's not. I wouldn't say it's tuned in any form. Like, it's not stacked with
mm,
counter spells. It's not stacked with tutors. I don't have win cons I don't have like constant win conditions. But the way that I piloted and the experience I have with it is I have won on
mm,
the tuned table with it because of my experience in the game and my experience with the deck.
mm,
So it's really hard
mm,
to say, hey, because you're playing that really busted deck, you need to go up to a higher table when we don't have that knowledge of the player. So I've always
mm.
had this
And
like thought process of like a ranking system for both decks and players and then matching that up to what the tables would
mm.
be. But that's a very hard like line that also doesn't factor in the social element of it.
And look, it's interesting, right? If you think about the format and what's happened with the format, it was a game that was developed to be played amongst groups of people that kind of knew each other
Yeah,
in a very casual, not competitive, not formal setting, right? And it's become the probably the number one
the primary format of Magic.
format,
It is Magic
primary
the Gathering
format of
now.
Magic, right?
Yeah.
And look, in discussions I've had with Charlotte and others, I don't think they envisage that.
No,
I think that's
absolutely not.
surprised. That had
they
that they're happy about it. They're excited about
would have
it,
had a more
but I think
stricter
that's
rule
somewhat
set.
they're somewhat surprised about that, right? And then trying to adjust for that. And I've had some interesting discussions with them about this, about how do you translate that into pickup games in a store environment like Vault, where you've got people signing up and being matched up on a Tuesday evening, where you guys, well, the people that work in the store, have got certain parameters in which you can work around and time, and doing this in a way that works for a business to match people up. It's very different from you've got a group of friends and you're hanging out and you can, start working out what decks work best with
Yeah.
what combination of decks, and you have an understanding about that and you get to know each other's play styles. And and I played at Vault for many weeks over the course of a year, and I've got to the point where I know that there's certain players and certain tables that when I sit down with, I know their decks, I know their play styles, so I know how to interact with that and have a good time. And sometimes it's harder. It's more clunky. It's harder to get that fit going. How do you do that in a store environment in which there's a bit of a, in some ways, a little bit of a mismatch between the format and the design of the format and what you're trying to do in a store event, I guess. The
Yeah.
challenges around making that work. And what's the responsibility? Now, I'll put this up there and out there, and you may or may not want to comment on this. What's the responsibility with WotC and the RC and etc. to be providing some clearer guidelines about how that may work for different types of events and environments, I guess.
Well, well that
And to what extent should they just leave that to the stores at a local level to sort
mm.
out themselves?
Well, that brings me to the next question that I have for you is we've kind of touched on it.
Mm,
Magic's primary format is now Commander. It is the biggest player base of the game now. They they are clearly designing products around Commander.
mm.
So what kind of like in your opinion, doesn't necessarily have to be your research back, but just in your opinion, has the shift to Commander first for Wizards been like a positive or a negative to you for the format, in both a gameplay and a community perspective?
I, from my experience, it's for personally, and it's a positive, right? But there are ups and downs with it, right? The positive is that it's brought in all these players, and many people that I've spoken to, the only way they've ever played Magic is Commander,
Mm.
right? They haven't drafted. They haven't played Standard. They haven't played Pioneer. They haven't played. They may or may not play a little bit online at Arena, and play some what's typically your typical 60 card Standard format. But they play Commander because they like Commander. This is how they found out about the game, heard about the game. They like that social interaction. That's what the game is for them, and it's worked. Right. Look at your oversubscribed Commander nights, your Tuesday nights, and
Mhm.
you're not doing that with your draft evenings, are you?
No, we're usually getting about 2 to 3 pods, which is still pretty good for a
Yeah,
draft, to be honest with you. Um,
yeah.
but yeah.
And I think about my own play history, that when I started playing way back, and when I would go to stores on Friday and Friday Night Magic, it was Standard and drafting,
Hmm.
and it was tended to be reasonably competitive, even if it was casually competitive. Um, they'd have you go to pre-release events, when new sets would come out, and they would tend to be more casual social events. You'd be there to chat about the new cards and have a bit of fun and build some crazy deck from whatever you opened. But Commander has changed that to this new format, and I think the community is still working out how that works in a business sense in a store environment, right? Because really stores and the way they've been, you can speak to this more than what I can, in the relationship with WotC, with Wizards, etc. It has been around that competitive events and pre-releases and drafts, etc. And I don't know if it's quite been worked through how you make that work for this different format that's Commander. I also think there's something COVID about it, post-COVID, and some players have talked to me about that. They've had a period where they couldn't play with people, couldn't get together and socially interact and play cards and games. COVID's over. They really wanted to do that. They don't want to just play online or at Arena, or so they're really enjoying that physical contact with other people, sitting around a table playing, coming out of COVID and the other side of COVID. And quite a few people have talked to me about that in the research I'm doing. So I think there's a few elements playing into it. I'm just not sure. And your perspective as a store owner and someone who's running these events on this is perhaps more significant. Is that, to me, what I'm seeing is a bit of a clunkiness mismatch between where the format and the game's gone, and how WotC understands what stores do around supporting events and how the events run.
Yeah, and it's always a hard discussion to have over like what do we have access to as a store and what rule sets
Mm,
can we run. Obviously they're doing like Commander Party stuff now, and they just announced that Commander Party is going to be available to all stores. We've had
yeah.
it for WPN Premium for the entire, like, since Dominaria United. We haven't run them yet because we're trying to find a date, and the materials never seem to arrive when they're meant to. So we've been
Mm.
scared to actually like run them, because it's like, oh well, we can announce it and they're meant to be another one next season, but we don't know when that's going to be because we're never sure that the materials are going to arrive. So that's like a whole discussion thing on that. But yeah, I am going to be reaching out to Wizards of the Coast to see if I can do some kind of help in explaining how we do our stuff and how that plays out, and how they can expand that to other stores.
And,
Um
and I must say, some of the discussions I did have with members of the RC, they were talking about, in general terms, about what more they can do in terms of guidelines,
mhm.
and suggestions. And I think that's the language that they were using, rather than mandatory requirements or anything like that, for stores, and how they could negotiate, and ways of negotiating these events, what different kinds of commander nights might look like, and also suggestions and guidelines for players how to negotiate that, perhaps a little bit beyond what the current commander philosophy sets out in the document about the rule zero conversation, using
Mhm.
that, putting a bit more detail or a bit more around that, may be a way of approaching that moving forwards. But from my perspective, what's interesting though is the messiness around that is kind of illuminating in terms of, and I think it will always be there in a game like Commander to some extent. And like you've already said this, Dylan, and suggested this. It's not always necessarily about the deck and about the mechanics and
Yeah.
about what gets banned, etc. It comes back to the players. right?
Yep.
And what you bring to the table in terms of consideration and empathy and communication, right? And it's with Commander being a social game, I don't think that's going to go away.
No.
So it's partly about when you come to play a game like Commander and you're sitting down with a group of people and you're shuffling up and you're making your deck. It's asking you questions as much about you as a player and what you're bringing to the table with that in terms of your communication and openness and inclusion, as how well you play your deck and how well you know your cards, right? And that ability to communicate and to be curious about other people and to be open to other
Mm-hmm.
people's experience and what they are bringing to the table and looking for. I think that's a really healthy thing, right? That's in some ways I view, even when it has problems and the experience of those problems and working through that through. I know it make great headaches for you guys at a store level, but I don't necessarily think that's always a bad thing, right? Because that can help people become better players. They can, in terms of players that are more open and welcoming to others and aware of the different way people experience play. And that's something that I really love about Commander.
Mm-hmm.
Even the nights it doesn't quite work and we have discussions and debriefs, I learn about myself as a player. I might learn of, do you know what, John, you might want to rethink that deck and even the way you're playing it, or that particular play that you made in the game. When I think about it from that person's perspective, what might not have been a great thing to do.
Yeah. So it's like a
You
layer of
know,
self moderation, essentially.
yeah, it is, but it's also an opportunity to learn and have about other people and their experiences of play and what they enjoy. The language about, hey, it was a great game. I didn't win, but we all got the opportunity to do our thing.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
that we all got to do our thing, and it's really interesting of what that do our thing means, and that getting to an understanding of that as you're playing and being aware of that. What's that for that person sitting across from me? What can I do to enable them to do their thing in this game?
It's
Right?
cool.
And it may not necessarily be they win the game, and I'm not talking about playing in a way that's king making or anything like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
It's more subtle than that, and it's that empathy, that consideration. And so an idea I have been playing around with my research and my writing is this idea of when you sit down and you play Commander, you got your deck and you've been doing your research and you've brought your cards and you're thinking about your play. Yep, it's all that, but it's also about you as a player. Magic fascinates me because it's asking questions about what kind of player do you want to be, not just about how good you want, that idea of being good at playing a game. It's about the mechanics. It's about your awareness of interaction and interaction opportunities and when you're going to drop that board wipe or when you're going to play that counter spell. The
Mm-hmm.
timing of that. Yeah, that's a skill, but there's a skill also at being good at social and being good and self-aware and generous about your communication with other players. And I think when those two things come together and mesh, you get some wonderful play experiences, right? Some just awesome times with other people. And that's when I feel that Commander vibe, you know, and literally it's the feels that are shared with other people around the table, and people leave feeling really good. And to me, that's the game. That's why I love Commander. That's why I like thinking about it and talking about it.
So, so just to finish off, then we're going to talk about some like what actions can people take. So from your study so
Yeah.
far, what do you think are some actions that stores or event or community organizers that they can take that can help
Yeah.
and foster this kind of inclusive community from like an organizational aspect?
I think the first thing is actually being aware and interested in the topic, in the issue, being aware that it's an issue and being prepared to actually think about it in a conscious way, in an intentional way, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's ground zero for me, that you have to actually, it's not just oh yeah, everybody should be able to come into our store and play. We don't have an issue with that. But actually being a bit more conscious and thoughtful about that. Well, what does that mean? Why have we only got maybe 90% or more of our store is white dudes of a certain age range? what are we doing that might be gatekeepery, and being honest about that, being
Hmm.
prepared to be honest and have some honest conversations about that, right? Being reflective about that, asking people, being open enough to ask people and have conversations about what are the things that we could do differently around that. I do think it comes down to the commitment of the owners to enabling and supporting that, and it can be tough. I think it's staffing. This is one big thing that many of the players have raised with me, how vital Vault staff are in supporting and fostering this, from the kinds of people you employ. And I don't necessarily mean it's just simply a case of employing people based on identity. But I think it does come into the equation. And if you've got some, of course, you want people that love games, deep game knowledge, prepared to share that with people. But in the mix, just as significantly, is diversity of staff, right? Because seeing who's on the store floor when somebody walks in, and that you actually can see people like or somewhat like you, that it's not all just guys, I
Hmm.
think contributes to that sense of comfort and welcome in an environment. So I think there's that. And I think there's that, you walk the walk, you can have your signs up about harassment and the standard signs about behaviors, but that you're actually seen to be practicing that and supporting and doing the necessary things when those clear boundaries are infringed. And I know that you've had to do that at times. You've had to ask people to leave the store. Um, you've had to have those tough discussions, being prepared to do that. But I think there's another level of it, which is, how would I put this? It's mentoring. It's those quiet conversations, those opportunities that I've seen your store staff and players and your store experience players have with people, which is not an aggressive, "Hey, you're doing this wrong," but you might want to think about this.
Yeah.
Have you thought about how that might make someone else feel?
Well, yeah,
Have you
that's
thought there's, you
there's
know,
there's definitely a layer of that in dealing with members of the community that don't that are not like neurotypical in the sense of regular players,
yep,
because there's a layer that is they they just don't know. And
yep,
it's all part of that education aspect of saying, hey, well, maybe this isn't correct. How this interaction happened was not correct. And where like our goal is a harmonious atmosphere. So let's have a chat about how we can make sure that you fit within that, and everyone involved, including yourself, ends up with a better experience overall.
yep.
Um,
And I think one of the points you raised there about neurodiversity, I think is an important one. It has come through strongly in my research, really strongly. It's surprised me a little bit, perhaps shouldn't have. I thought I would hear from looking at Vault, and I have significance of issues of gender, the significance of issues of sexual identity, LGBTQI people, non-binary people, a range of different identifications, and you have a big community of diverse players from all those various backgrounds and experiences that share with me their different experiences of Commander and playing at Vault. But quite a few people have identified as neurodiverse, right? And in discussions. And that's been very interesting, the different ways that neurodiverse people navigate and understand social interaction. And I'm quite happy to say I identify as neurodiverse myself. So, and I think that that's a really interesting conversation that I don't see, that hasn't emerged a lot in the research as yet, or necessarily in the wider community, that when we're talking about neurodiversity and the way neurodiverse people interact with each other and neurotypical people, that adds another layer to what we understand social interaction to
mhm.
be, and how it works and how people are comfortable with it. So I think that's an important dimension. Um,
So that then leads me into like the other side of the action of for people as well to understand from this, to take away from this interview, is also like if you're just a
mm,
player in the community, what kind of actions can they take and how they
yeah.
interact within that community?
I think one of the big ones, right? And even for me, I keep reminding myself I don't want to just lecture to people and say, "Hey, I get it right. I know this, and
Yeah.
and this is how you've got to be." I'm learning myself. One of the reasons I like playing Commander, I learned a lot about myself and my own assumptions and perspectives and prejudices about interacting with other people. So just to be open and curious about that, and not assume that based on your identity, your personal background, that's the way it is. That's the norm, right? Being prepared to be open and aware and observant that people may experience things that you do or things about their own comfort levels in playing differently than you. So be open about being prepared to be picked up on that, have a conversation about that, to be reflective about that, to ask politely about that. So it's fine. I generally introduce myself in games. Hey, I'm John. My personal pronouns are he, him.
Hmm.
What are the preferred pronouns of people that you're playing with? Respect that. Do you have a player that what you're picking up on with your play on them is that they are perhaps a little bit socially anxious, and that there are some interactions that make them uncomfortable? How can you negotiate that? Can you have a discussion about that? Or does that discussion not make that person comfortable? It's not easy. It's not always easy, but I
Hmm.
think being open enough to have some sort of awareness that these issues are important, and to work on that and to be prepared to work on that with yourself and others. I think that's a great starting point. I will say that there are things that I'm just not tolerant of. I don't have time for it. I'll be open about it. If somebody comes in and they're just refusing after being politely reminded or asked to use someone's appropriate pronouns,
Yeah.
or they are being bullying, or they are playing in a really what we would call toxic, obnoxious
Hmm.
way, despite being, I'm just literally going to stand up and leave that table and not
Yeah.
play with that person. I think there are some boundaries there. There are some just not acceptables that I have, and that I think other players have as well, that we can be open about. But I think it gets more complex. That in some ways that's easy. That's I'm not necessarily for the people that are experiencing that. I'm talking about my own accountability as a white privileged guy
Mm.
and what I can do in those circumstances. For me, that's easy. I call it out, or I get up and walk away, or I draw management's attention to it. I have an accountability and responsibility to do that because of my privileges, right? But it's definitely not easy for the people that are experiencing that, or on
Hmm.
the other end of that, or have been experiencing that. I want to be clear on that.
So
But I
it's kind
think
of
we're
it's kind of sitting at like, be open to discuss the problems that you can create, be open to
yeah,
discussing the problems you encounter, and
counter.
don't tolerate intolerance.
Yeah,
That's
and again, but the interesting parts is where it's a bit blurry, right? And where it may be an exercise in education, and it may be that someone just really doesn't understand their own privilege or their own identity, and how it can be, because they've never really thought about that much, and how it can make another player something that they're not assuming is remotely making another person uncomfortable, but it is. So how do we have those tougher conversations in ways that are okay for all those involved? And I think it comes back to some points that your staff make with me over and over again. Come back to Trent. It's about being considerate,
yeah,
about being
it's being
empathetic.
considerate.
You know,
Cool.
yeah, it comes. So thanks so much, Dylan, for supporting the research,
No
for
worries.
allowing me the time to interact with you and your staff there at Vault. And it's it's been quite an adventure, and I think it's really helped me think, I think hopefully in a meaningful way, about these issues and challenges, and hopefully what I end up with will make a contribution back to the
Yeah.
community as well.
Well, thank you for
And
joining
by the way,
me. Oh, sorry, you go.
if anyone out there watching in the community wants to participate in the research and wants to have a conversation about their experience, please reach out to me. There are ethical requirements I have for undertaking my research that are required by QUT, that are there about the kinds of people that can participate. For example, anyone under 18, no. But I'm more than happy to have some conversations with people if they're interested in contributing or
Yeah,
participating.
and you can find John on the Vault Games community Discord server at discord.gg/Vault Games. Let us know in the comments below if you'd like John to reach out to you as well. We'll pass that all on to John. And yeah, I just want to say thanks, John, for sitting down for this interview that went longer than I thought it would.
Yeah, you might want
uh,
to, maybe you're gonna have
yeah,
to cut it a
there's
bit.
definitely going to be an edit to this one. I'll see if we put up an unedited version of this. Maybe we'll see. But thanks so
Cool.
much for joining me for this. It's been awesome picking your brain on this whole discussion over Commander and inclusivity in environments. And yeah, absolutely. If you want to hear more from John, jump on the Discord. So if you want to participate in the research, jump on the Discord server and have a chat to John on there, and see if he can get together with you and add your stories to part of the research, and let us know in the comments about what kind of inclusive communities you've discovered and how how that inclusivity has helped you, and how it's come about. I think that's it. Thanks so
Dylan.
much, John. Have a good week, and I guess I'll catch you Tuesday night at Commando.
Probably. See ya.
All right, see you. Thanks so much, John.